Lucy Fernandez was in her element at the high society charity event in New York City. The 22-year-old, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and an elegant dress that accentuated her slender figure, knew she was drawing attention. But her interest went beyond the superficial admiration of the attendees. She had a clear goal: to find an opportunity that could change her life forever. It was in this setting that her eyes met those of Richard Davis, a man who exuded power and wealth. Richard, at 74, was a renowned widower, known for his fortune and influence in New York. He stood out in the crowd not just because of his age, but also due to the way he commanded the atmosphere with his calm and confident presence. Lucy, ever the strategist, saw Richard as an opportunity. His frail appearance and kind manners contrasted with the power he held. The idea of approaching him came almost automatically, as if some greater force guided her steps. It didn't take long before she found a way to start a conversation. "Good evening, Mr. Davis," she said with a charming smile. "What a wonderful event, don't you think?" Richard, with an interested look, replied, "Indeed, and I must say, it's rare to find someone so young with a genuine interest in charity." The conversation flowed naturally, and in no time, Lucy realized that Richard was captivated by her. Every word, every gesture, was meticulously calculated by Lucy to build the image of a young woman fascinated by his stories and experiences. And Richard, apparently, saw no malice in her attention. Days passed and their friendship blossomed. Lucy played all her cards right, and Richard seemed increasingly enchanted by her company. Before long, the relationship began to deepen, with Richard showing a special interest in her. For Lucy, every moment spent with Richard brought her closer to her ultimate goal: a life of luxury and security guaranteed by Richard's fortune. But deep down, Richard was not as naive as Lucy thought. There was something in his eyes, a wisdom accumulated over the years, that Lucy didn't perceive as she continued her selfish journey to conquer his fortune. She, however, was confident that she was in control of the situation, unaware that the seeds of something much larger were being planted. Over time, the relationship between Lucy and Richard became the center of attention in New York's high society. It was impossible not to notice the age difference between them, but Lucy handled the curious looks and rumors with the same coldness and determination that had always characterized her. For her, it was all part of a bigger plan, and nothing could divert her focus. Lucy moved into the Davis mansion, an imposing structure that exuded tradition and power. Each room was decorated with antique furniture, valuable artwork, and heavy curtains that darkened the hallways. The mansion, with its secrets and stories, seemed a reflection of Richard, opulent and enigmatic. It was in the mansion that Lucy met Maria, Richard's only daughter. Maria, a 45-year-old woman, was the opposite of Lucy in almost every way. Reserved, pragmatic, and naturally distrustful, Maria quickly realized that the young woman might not be as innocent as she seemed. The look Maria gave Lucy was always loaded with suspicion, but she had no concrete evidence to confront her. "So, you've decided to live here," Maria said during one of her first conversations with Lucy. Her voice was controlled, but there was a perceptible tension. "I hope you know that this house has its rules." Lucy smiled, not allowing herself to be intimidated. "I'm aware, Maria. I'm here to support your father. I hope we can get along." But Maria was not convinced. Richard, on the other hand, seemed increasingly delighted with Lucy, treating her with a warmth that Lucy had never experienced before. He took her to sophisticated dinners, social events, and even on short trips to places Lucy had only dreamed of visiting. However, every now and then, Lucy noticed a slight smile on Richard's lips, as if he knew something she didn't. That smile made her uncomfortable, but she quickly dismissed the feeling, believing it was just her imagination. As time went on, their relationship became more serious. Richard began talking about the future, about what he planned for his remaining years. To Lucy, this sounded like music to her ears, as it meant she was getting closer to achieving her ultimate goal. She was determined to maintain the facade of a devoted girlfriend, even if it meant dealing with Maria's growing distrust and the occasional discomfort caused by Richard's subtle comments. But amid all these power games and manipulation, Lucy didn't realize that she might be entering a much bigger game than she imagined. As the months passed, Lucy's presence in the Davis mansion became increasingly permanent. She had adapted to the rhythm of the house, learning to navigate the hallways as if she had always been part of that world. However, despite her outward confidence, she felt the growing pressure of Maria's distrust. Maria observed Lucy's every move with a critical eye. Richard's daughter was not fooled by the young woman's affable behavior. Maria knew there was something deeper behind Lucy's impeccable smile, but without concrete evidence, she was powerless to act. This frustrated her deeply, as the mansion and everything it represented meant the world to Maria. "She's playing some kind of game, Dad," Maria said to Richard during a dinner. "I don't trust her, and I think you should be cautious too." Richard smiled, that enigmatic smile that made Lucy uncomfortable. "Maria, dear, you've always been so protective. But don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Those words did not reassure Maria. On the contrary, they made her even more determined to uncover what Lucy really wanted. She began discreetly searching for any information she could use against the young woman, going through papers, observing interactions, and even talking to Richard's old friends. Meanwhile, Lucy also began to feel the weight of Maria's words. Although she was confident she had control of the situation, Maria's distrust began to awaken a sense of insecurity within her. She knew she needed to stay strong and continue playing her cards carefully, but the growing tension within the mansion was starting to affect her. It was during this period that Richard casually mentioned the reading of his will. Lucy froze for a moment when he brought up the topic, but quickly regained her composure. "I intend to gather everyone soon for the reading of my will," Richard said, with a calmness that only served to increase Lucy's anxiety. She knew that this moment would be crucial. Her entire plan depended on what Richard decided to leave her, and the idea that he might be aware of her intentions began to haunt her. However, Lucy refused to believe that her plan could fail. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she was determined to secure her future no matter the cost. The big day arrived, and the atmosphere in the mansion was thick with tension. Everyone was gathered in the main hall, a vast room with high ceilings and walls adorned with portraits of former Davis family members. Richard, seated in a leather armchair, seemed relaxed, while everyone around him was tense. Lucy was impeccably dressed, as always, but inside, she was struggling to hide the nervousness threatening to overwhelm her. The tension in the air was palpable, and she knew everything depended on what happened in the next few hours. John Sullivan, the family's longtime lawyer, stood up and began reading the will. As the words echoed through the room, Lucy felt her heart race. She anxiously awaited the moment when her name would be mentioned and what it would mean for her future. Finally, John reached the part involving Lucy. "To Lucy Fernandez, who has brought joy and renewal to my life in recent months, I leave." What followed took Lucy completely by surprise. Instead of the fortune she expected, Richard left her an unusual legacy. A collection of properties and businesses scattered across different regions of the United States, all tied to a peculiar condition. Lucy could only fully assume possession of these assets if she completed a series of tasks stipulated by Richard, each more strange and challenging than the last. Lucy could hardly believe what she was hearing. The will seemed more like a trap than a reward. The conditions were complex, requiring travel, negotiations, and the resolution of old family conflicts that Richard had intentionally left unresolved. Furthermore, any failure would result in the total loss of any right to the inheritance. The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes were on Lucy, waiting to see her reaction. Maria, on the other hand, couldn't hide a small smile of satisfaction. Lucy, however, maintained her composure, even though her mind was in chaos. Richard watched the scene with a look that mixed curiosity and something deeper, almost as if he were testing Lucy. He knew she was there for selfish reasons, but he wanted to see how far she would go now that the situation had drastically changed. Lucy, as frightened as she was, knew she couldn't waver. Her plans had been shattered in one fell swoop, but she still had to play the game. She needed to find a way to navigate the conditions of the will, or else everything she had worked for would be in vain. After the reading of the will, Lucy felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The conditions imposed by Richard were absurd, and she knew that each task would be more challenging than the last. But there was no time to hesitate. With all eyes on her, especially Maria's, Lucy knew she had to act. In the days that followed, Lucy tried to familiarize herself with the properties and businesses that were now her responsibility. Each one seemed to be entangled in some sort of controversy or legal problem. Additionally, the tasks imposed by Richard seemed intentionally designed to test her, both mentally and emotionally. While Lucy dealt with the demands of the will, Maria took every opportunity to make her life difficult. She made sure to remind Lucy of every failure, every obstacle that arose. Maria saw Lucy's struggle as a well-deserved revenge and was determined to see her fail. "And how's the work going, Lucy?" Maria asked in an almost amused tone during a tense breakfast. "Those tasks must be challenging for someone with so little experience." Lucy, controlling the anger boiling inside her, replied coldly, "I'm handling everything as best as I can, Maria. It's nothing I can't solve." But the truth was that Lucy was desperate. Each day, the pressure mounted, and she felt like she was losing control of the situation. However, there was something else that unsettled her. She began to notice strange details in the documents Richard had left. Small hints that he might have known about her intentions from the beginning. One night, while reviewing another set of papers, Lucy found a letter hidden among the documents. The letter, written by Richard, was addressed to her. With trembling hands, Lucy began to read. In the letter, Richard revealed that he had always known about Lucy's intentions. He wrote about how, from the beginning, he perceived the ambition behind her charm. However, Richard also spoke about how he saw potential in Lucy, something the young woman didn't see in herself. He wanted her to go beyond her selfish intentions, to grow as a person. The conditions of the will, he explained, were created to test whether Lucy could become someone better, someone capable of achieving greater things than just inheriting a fortune. Lucy was shocked by the revelation. On one hand, she felt humiliated knowing that Richard had always been one step ahead. On the other, she began to question her own motivations. Could she really overcome these conditions? Was she willing to change and become the person Richard hoped she could be? These questions began to torment her as she found herself increasingly trapped in a web of challenges and revelations that would change her life forever. The days that followed the discovery of the letter were the most challenging Lucy had ever faced. Richard's words echoed constantly in her mind, challenging her to reconsider everything she had done up to that point. For the first time, she began to wonder if her pursuit of Richard's fortune was truly worth it. Lucy also began to feel the growing pressure of fulfilling the tasks stipulated in the will. Each new demand seemed more difficult and more personal than the last. She realized that Richard was not only testing her but also forcing her to confront her own flaws and weaknesses. One of the most disturbing challenges involved resolving an old land dispute between the Davis family and a group of small local landowners. This dispute had been set aside by Richard, but it was now Lucy's responsibility to resolve it in a way that benefited all parties involved. It was not just a matter of legality. It was a matter of justice, something Lucy had never seriously considered before. As she dealt with this challenge, Lucy began to realize the impact of her actions. She saw the suffering of the people involved in the dispute and began to feel empathy for them. For the first time, the young woman who had always thought only of herself began to consider the consequences of her actions on others. Meanwhile, Maria continued to watch Lucy closely. She noticed the gradual change in the young woman's attitude and began to wonder if Richard might have been right to believe that Lucy could redeem herself. However, Maria remained skeptical. To her, the idea that Lucy could change seemed unlikely, but there was something in the young woman's recent actions that left her intrigued. Lucy, for her part, began to realize that she might not be as alone as she thought. Although Maria continued to be a hostile presence, the lawyer John Sullivan began to show a genuine interest in helping her. He saw Lucy's internal struggle and believed that Richard had seen something special in her. "You don't have to face this alone, Lucy," John said in a private conversation. Richard always knew what he was doing. If he believed you could overcome these challenges, then maybe you should believe it too. These words gave Lucy the strength she needed to continue. There were still many doubts in her mind, but she knew she couldn't give up. The conditions imposed by Richard seemed impossible, but each small step she took brought her closer to something greater than just an inheritance. Lucy began to understand that by facing these challenges, she was not only fighting for money, but for a new life and a new purpose. As the weeks passed, Lucy began to understand that the tasks left by Richard were not just tests of her ability, but carefully crafted lessons to change her perspective on life. The land dispute, for example, which initially seemed like just a legal obstacle, turned into a transformative experience. Lucy not only resolved the conflict fairly but also established a genuine connection with the people involved. For the first time, she saw how power and influence could be used for good, rather than just personal gain. This shift in her thinking left Lucy at a crossroads. She knew she could try to manipulate the situation to secure the inheritance, but that would mean betraying the spirit of the lessons Richard wanted her to learn. On the other hand, she could fully embrace this new perspective, even if it meant losing the fortune she so desired. Maria continued to observe Lucy with skepticism, but now there was a trace of respect in her gaze. She was beginning to realize that perhaps, just perhaps, Lucy was becoming the person Richard had hoped she would be. Nevertheless, Maria was still prepared to intervene if she noticed any signs that Lucy might be pretending. The decisive moment came when Lucy received one final letter from Richard, delivered by the lawyer John Sullivan. In it, Richard wrote that he knew the journey he had proposed was arduous, but that he also believed she had the power to overcome her own demons. Richard challenged her to make a final decision: continue pursuing the inheritance by the means she had always used, or give it all up in the name of personal and moral growth. Lucy read the letter several times, feeling the weight of Richard's words. She knew this was the final test, the last evaluation of character that he had prepared for her. The decision she would make now would define not only her future but also who she truly was as a person. After a long night of reflection, Lucy made her decision. The next morning, she gathered everyone in the mansion, including Maria and John. With a resolute expression, she announced that she had decided to renounce the inheritance. She explained that during her journey, she had discovered that true wealth did not lie in money or possessions, but in the connections we establish and the actions we take to improve the world around us. Maria remained silent, clearly surprised by Lucy's decision. John, on the other hand, smiled approvingly, seeing in Lucy the person Richard had always believed she could become. Lucy handed over all the documents and titles back to the lawyer, sealing her decision. She knew that this choice meant giving up everything she had fought for, but she also knew it was the right choice. For the first time in her life, she felt genuine peace, knowing she had surpassed everyone's expectations, including her own. With her decision made, Lucy left the Davis mansion, taking with her only the lessons she had learned and the conviction that she could build a new life for herself. As she walked down the long driveway leading to the gates of the property, she looked back one last time, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and relief. Maria and John remained at the mansion's door, watching as Lucy walked away. Maria, who had always doubted the young woman's intentions, now felt a mix of respect and curiosity. She didn't know what the future held for Lucy, but something inside her made her believe that the young woman would do something significant with her life. John, for his part, was confident that Richard would have been proud of Lucy. He knew that the old Davis had planned everything meticulously, and that his intention had never been simply to punish Lucy, but to give her a chance to redeem herself and find a greater purpose. Lucy decided to start her new life far from New York, in a small coastal town where no one knew her. She used the skills and knowledge she had acquired during her journey to help the local community, working with charities and dedicating her time to projects that truly made a difference in people's lives. Over the months, Lucy built a new identity for herself, based on honesty, hard work, and the desire to contribute to the common good. Although the path was challenging, she felt a deep satisfaction in every small progress she made. Richard's legacy was not the inheritance she had imagined, but the wisdom he left behind. Lucy finally understood that true wealth lay in the choices we make and the impact we have on others. As the sun set over the small coastal town, Lucy reflected on her journey. She knew there was still much to learn and conquer, but now she was ready to face whatever came next. And, for the first time, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be.